Hey YouTube, this is Jimmy from Jimmy Woodworks again. Today I'm going to talk about Mach4 Screen Editing. I've had quite a few requests from people in the last 9 months or so. Basically questions about where'd you get some of the laser screen features and things like that. And then when I told them that they're ones I wrote and that Mach4 has a nice screen editor that's actually very simple to use, I got a lot of requests to go make that into a video. There isn't a lot of information out there. There's a couple of really good videos that can get you started from Artsoft, who makes Mach4. There's kind of a tutorial on how to use the editor itself, and I'm going to put links to the stuff in the description down below. There's also a couple of videos out there from Mach4 users who made specific features. In fact, a couple of the ones I have for moving the gantry around were from that guy, and I'll put links for that as well. And then I added a bunch for laser work because I wanted one screen that had all my Avid, kind of the original Avid features that they put in the Avid screen for spindle work, but I also wanted close by or conveniently in the same screen the things that I use with my laser. So I've combined those and added some features for doing offsets and other things in both spindle and laser to make some of the things I do easier. And so I want to show you how easy the screen editor is to use. Point out a couple of things to look out for with it because it's easy to mess up positions and things like that. So I'll go over that, how to do backups so that you can recover from it, and where all the files are located in Mach4. I'm going to try to cover all of that as well. So hopefully this is useful for those of you. It's not going to be an in-depth tutorial on the screen editor. It's going to be kind of to get you going on it and show you how the basics of how it works and where things are, and give you some ideas on customizations that might be helpful to you, just so you can start thinking about it and give it a try. It's very easy to do. You can make multiple copies of the different screens, and if you don't like them, just throw them away. So it's not really any risk. And if you pay attention to what you're doing, it's not much of a risk that you're going to mess up Mach4 or anything like that. Mach4 is actually pretty easy to recover from mess ups. I'll cover that. So let's get into some of the customizations that I've made first and why I did them, just related to how I use my machine. Okay, I've powered my machine on and just homed it. And so at this point, normally I would want to get my gantry out of the way and I could jog it out of the way quickly, but it's much more convenient to have a couple of positions to just use a hotkey on your keyboard. Now, I don't use the keyboard on my laptop and I don't use the pendant. I have one of these $19 wireless keyboards that you could buy on Amazon. This is a full function keyboard, but it's very small. It comes with a little USB plug-in, so it's plug and play ready to run with Mach4 because it's just another keyboard that Windows can run. And so one of the first customizations I did was I was looking on YouTube and saw a YouTube channel called Tlar. He had a modification or some functions to move the gantry around. So I added those. So if I want to go to the middle of my table, I can just hit Control-M and my machine quickly moves there, so I don't have to hold down the jog buttons and move them around. I have a position up front for spindle changes of the bits where it's convenient. I can send it to the back to get the gantry out of the way when I want to work on my projects. Most of my projects are small and in the center here, so I have a position up front and back, one in the middle here. So these are just quick, easy additions. You're adding a key function and some code behind it to run. Other things that I want to do, for example, I want to turn my laser on so that I can move it around and find where it's pointing, so I can set my X, Y zeros. or sometimes I want to be able to turn it on so I can move my Z around and set the dot size. So when I have my laser on, I can hit a function to turn the laser on. It's very low power, so it's not going to burn me. So I don't have to go back and hold the buttons on in the laser screen and turn it off. So those are some simple conveniences for working around here with keystrokes. So again, Mach4 has the ability to add keystrokes very easily to do basic things that are built into Mach4 as well as custom functions. So I'm going to go over that. You can add, there's really no limit to the things you can do. Any functions you can add a button for in Mach4, you can also make a screen shortcut for it. A lot of people don't know it, but Avid's package of Mach4 actually already has all the jogging keystrokes, in there. They know you can use the screen on your key to jog with the buttons. You can also use your keyboard to jog. You can do incremental jogs by holding control down. This is going at 10,000ths of an inch right now. You can hold the shift button down and do the fast jog. Those functions are actually already built into Mach4, so with these other things that I've just shown, I'm just adding to those. So that's one section of Mach4 screen editing. All of these functions are contained within one file. I'll go over that, but the functions and then the key additions are screens in Mach4. So we'll go over all the different places where we have to add things to make this work. But that makes it, much more convenient to make things happen here when you're right here, and you don't need an expensive pendant or any special plugins for it or anything. You can go on Amazon and get one of these and then just make some additions to Mach4. One other thing I wanted to show on the machine before we go to the main computer and go over the menus and the software is that on my laser I added a feature to use the electronic touch plate. So I made a rod off to the side that's mounted to the router. So I have this quick disconnect mount that I made that reattaches itself precisely to the other mount, but within this mount I've added this rod and I can tighten it down with the thumb screws, but this has a fixed position based on where this is screwed down relative to the beam. So now I can use this with the electronic touch plate just like you would with the router bit. It conducts through the rod. Normally I would Z it down, and so in this position I can set the Z height. Now it would run the touch plate operation, the standard one that's in in the Avid setup. Avid's got a very nice software feature that goes with the touch plate they sell. So I could do the Z. I can do X, Y, and Z off the corner if I want, just like I would with the router bit on the spindle, but now with the laser. But you'll notice I have both an X, Y, and Z offset here. Unlike with a spindle, you're actually using the bit itself, so you don't need any offsets. But with this, I need to do an X, Y, and Z offset so that the position where the conductive pin is translated to where the laser beam is. So that's one of the functions that I've added. I'm going to talk about that later, but I just wanted to show physically what this looks like so that makes sense later when we're talking about it. This can be used, I've seen some people have laser crosshairs that they've mounted to, say, the side of their spindle. So this feature could work to calculate an offset for that, or pretty much any other kind of feature. I mean, you could mount something like this on a plasma head, or any other type of cutter head that doesn't have a electrically conductive bit like the spindle does. So this kind of thing is really easy to add, and I'll show with the software that I added to my Mach4 screen. You can use that to make those one quick button push and make those offsets. The other thing it's useful for is you want different heights for the laser depending on what kind of operation you're. So if you're doing cutting, for example, you want the smallest beam possible so that you get the highest power density. That will give you the fastest and cleanest cut. But unfortunately, for example, with a diode laser, the smallest beam typically is not symmetrical. And in my case, my beam, when it's the smallest, is 2/1000ths of an inch tall, but about 7 or 8/1000ths of an inch wide. So that's okay for cutting. But if I want to do like picture rastering scans, I want a symmetrical, like a 7x7, or the same height and width pixel. So in that case, I need to go up another 40/1000ths on my laser, and that non-symmetrical beam will become symmetrical. So this software also lets you easily program those different Z heights in without putting a spacer block under here or trying to remeasure every time. Once you do some characterization with the laser and you know those physical numbers based on the lens's focal points, it's easy to do these offsets really quickly then with the software, and I'll show that later. Okay, let's cover first what is a screen. This is a pretty basic thing. The screen is everything you see here on Mach4 and a lot of the code that goes behind it. So for example, all of these buttons here that you can push, all of the digital readouts here that display information or where you can add information, all of these switches that you can control, all of this is the screen, and that's kind of the graphical part that you see. So where these buttons are, how big are they, what color are they, all of that kind of thing is what I would call the graphical part of the screen that you can design and edit. And then there's the things behind it. So when I push this button, one aspect of it is that's just simply a button somebody designed. There's some text relay 1 that goes next to it, and then when you click it, it turns to this on position. When you click it again, it turns it to this off position. That's actually 2 different display items. They're separate displays, just like these up and down arrows are separate items. And some of these things have they're taking information from Mach4 and reading it out. For example, this history log down here is taking error code, error messages, and things that different functions can print out and just displaying it. Whereas some of these buttons turn specific functions on or cause something to happen. So that's the other part of what a screen is those functions behind the screen. When you push a button, what happens? When I hit disable here, that's disabling all the motors and everything in Mach4. So we're going to look at this and see, how does this run this code? So the screen itself is contained in one file with all this code and the design of the screen itself. So it's very convenient. You can literally take this file, email it to somebody else, and they can install it on Mach4 and load it and actually use it. Now, there are ways to have functions outside of the screen that require extra work. So a good example of this is, if I enable the Avid Auto Touch screen here, this is a function that's separate from the Mach4 screen. So the button is calling the function, but the function, in this case, it's a proprietary function written by Avid CNC, very nice touch, electronic touch plate software package. You can't see the code. They only give the compiled version. You can link it in and use it, but it's their own code, so it kind of comes, you get it when you buy the touch plate itself with them. But that's a little bit more of a rarity. Most of the functions that are here in the screen itself are going to be visible from the screen. And then the screen buttons can also call functions that are built into Mach4, like, for example, jogging. Now, let me close this window. If you go to the jogging menu here, all of these jog X, jog Y, incremental steps, these are all features built into Mach4, and these buttons are simply just calling those functions. So we'll take a look at all of that as we go through this here. Okay, now let's look at how we load a screen and where we find how many or which screens are available. So first thing we need to do is disable Mach4. For most of these editing functions and screen changing loading functions, you need to have the machine disabled, so these menus become available. So you go under the view menu up here and say load screen, and this is going to display all the screen sets that it found. So there's a directory that I'll go over later that has all of these set. These are literally the file names of these screen sets, and so the one that I have loaded is my personal one. We can go back here and pick the Avid one. I double click on that. Now it's loading the screen, and now you see the screen is different. This is the default screen set that you get with an Avid CNC configuration. And you see, you know, keep a note here. All of these colors, if I enable it, some of them change, but basically all of these buttons are gray. The tool change is gray, the jogging are gray. So they're kind of not very pretty, and in some cases I like to highlight the colors on these, so we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's how you load the screen and change them. And when you're doing that, you're changing how it looks, and you're also loading the functions that I talked about before that are behind these buttons. So we can also go look at one that would come with, like this is a router screen that comes with Mach4. It's not an Avid one. It's one of the default screens. So you can see this is completely different. And this is the way they wrote that one. There's actually a screen in here from Warp 9. It's a laser screen, so this is version 3 and a laser, a basic laser and a version 3 set. These come from Warp 9, not from Avid, and they don't come with Mach4. This is something that when you have ESS, you can load these with the ESS. Basically load it from Warp 9's website, and a lot of the functions are the same. This area up in the left isn't significantly different, but it does look different. And you have your start functions and your kind of your typical, you know, run operations, toolpath and jogging things. Everybody kind of modifies these to their own personal taste, and that's kind of what this video is all about. But I just wanted to show that there's a lot of different ones that you can load and try out. I want to point out especially this section on the lower right here. This is the laser functionality. This is really the piece that's important for this laser screen. All of this other stuff is just, you know, displaying the cutting, the actual tool path up on the upper right, and setting your Z and X, Y zeros, you know, and loading files and running them. All of that's gonna be there in pretty much any Mach4 screen, because, you know, you have to do those things to essentially run anything useful. But what's kind of different is, you know, do I have a router? Do I have a laser? Do I have a plasma head? And that's kind of a lot of times where the customization comes in. So this lower right stuff here is something that's very useful for laser, and that's, we'll talk about that later, but that is something I adopted, and you'll see that I didn't really change any of it because it's, you know, they've done a nice job with how they wrote this piece. And in fact, we'll see in Avid's, if you see in the up in this operations menu, Avid has made a pull down tab that actually includes this stuff as well, because it's useful. So anyway, that's how you load screens and go back and forth between different ones. All right, let's take a little tour of the Mach4 directory. It's good to know where some of these files are, especially in the event that you are going to edit things. You want to make some backups and know how to handle it when things go bad. So let's first look at the Mach4 is in the C directory. You can see I have a Mach4 hobby directory. That's the active one. So when you install Mach4, you'll get an icon on your screen that is looking for the Mach4 copy that's in a directory called Mach4 hobby. Now the nice thing about Mach4 is it doesn't install itself with tentacles everywhere, like into the Windows registry and other things. It's literally all contained inside that Mach4 hobby directory, which means it's very easy to make backups. You can see here I've got a Mach4 hobby. The way I name these is this is actually version 279 beta 3 of the ESS plugin. Sometimes I just call it old when I'm going back and forth. A lot of times I'll put the Mach4 revision like 4720 underscore 278, which would be the Mach4 revision and the ESS version, because I'm trying different things. And so or I'll date them sometimes because I know this is the last good working version and I'm about to embark on some modifications, and if I mess it up I can simply rename the directory and bring back the one that I know was working. So this is what why I always suggest is take this, right click on it, make a copy here, Control V, make you a new one here, and now I got a copy. I can rename this to something like last working, call it whatever you want. But now I've got that backed up, and I can rename this last working. I could, if I mess up the one that I'm working on, which would be the Mach4 hobby one, because that's always the active one. Now I'll start editing Mach4 hobby, and if I mess that up and want to go back, I can always delete it and just simply go back, and save this one and rename it. But I'm going to delete it now because I don't want an extra copy on my computer. So that's how to back up the Mach4 directory itself. It's not that big, so it's a couple hundred megabytes. So on most computers, that's not a big deal. So I'll typically have, especially on my actual Mach4 computer that runs Mach4 on my machine, I have quite a few of these because I do more of my editing there. So now let's go into Mach4. You see here we've got a few different directories. I talked about the screens. So if we go to the screens directory, here are all the actual screen set files. So that list, when we loaded the screen, is just simply going to this directory and finding everything with a extension .set, and it's displaying it for you. These files are binary files. You can't look at them with a text editor because they have, that's because that's how the developers wrote them. All of the information for the graphics information, the buttons and everything is in there, and all the code is in there that's embedded with the screen. So what's cool is you can literally copy, say, this file here. I have it up on my website on my share drive, and actually I'll have a link for that down in the description section of this video. You can go download it and just simply copy it into this directory, then start Mach4 and load it and run it. It's all self-contained within this file. And the other nice thing is you can make, just like we talked about making a backup for Mach4, you can copy any one of these. So there's one thing to know that's very important is Mach4 has a tendency to corrupt some of its files if something crashes. The machine INI file I find is easy to corrupt. For example, if you shut off your machine without shutting down Mach4 first, or sometimes Mach4 will crash on its own, especially if you're messing around with code like this, or you get a power outage or whatever on your laptop. There's lots of reasons why that can happen. It doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, it's nice to be able to recover from that. There's a recovery mechanism for the machine INI file I'll talk about in a bit, but because there's no undo button in the screen editor, it's always a good idea if you're going to start editing the screens, you can also make a copy of this file and just call it copy or backup or whatever, and then if you screw up the other one, you can just delete it and rename this thing back to your original name. That's why I've got for example right here, I've got one that I backed up on a certain date, and it's a date and the ESS version and the Mach4 version that I was using at the time, and that way if I need to reinstate it, I can simply make a copy. So that's the screens. I talked about the machine.ini file. Now this doesn't have too much to do with screen editing, but a lot of those parameters or some of the parameters that you save when you're screen setting to make a default, like a DRO that's a default so that it's the same every time you open up Mach4, can be saved. There's different things that can be saved in the INI file. So you find that if you go to profiles, and then in this case we're running an Avid CNC profile because I'm on an Avid machine. So inside of this is your information for that INI file. Here's the machine INI file. This is where all the defaults and a lot of things are stored. And it's really kind of an interesting file to go through as well. And this is a text file, so if I open this up, you can see all of your configurations are stored in here, all of your default values, and in some cases Mach4 can save back values for your session, like what your last jog, incremental jog setting was, for example, or other things. So there's a lot of, your recently used files, lots of stuff in here. And this is the one that gets corrupted often, and they know it. So if you go to see this backup directory, what you'll see is a whole bunch of backup versions for your machine.ini file, and you can just see that it's basically every date where you opened or closed Mach4. So this is a really interesting or a useful thing to understand is if something happened in Mach4 and it's starting to act kind of weird or something, there's a good chance that this machine INI file got corrupted. And so what you can do is simply go into the backups directory here and pick one of these files based on the date where you know that Mach4 was working okay, right? Maybe it was yesterday, maybe it was last week, but pick one of these files, copy it, go back to this directory and paste it in here. Now you're going to have to delete your machine INI, or maybe you want to rename it because you don't want to get rid of it, but you suspect it's corrupted. You can rename it and then copy the other one in and take that backup number off of it. This dot, these incremental numbers are just numbers that are added so that they have a unique file name. You want to delete that so it's just machine.ini and put it in this directory and restart Mach4, and now you'll be kind of reverted back to that other INI file. So this is a nice way to recover from it, and Avid CNC has provided a recovery routine which just does exactly what I just described. It's just basically taking an older version, it's showing you all the older version dates and asking you when it was working. You can pick that file and it basically just copies it over and installs that older backup as your current machine.ini file. So you can do that yourself just as easily. It's faster from what I find. Okay, there's a couple other places that have some information that's interesting. First, obviously, the documentation directory or the docs directory under Mach4. There's a couple files that are interesting. One is this Mach4 core API. So if you're going to be somebody that's getting into editing code or making your own functions, you want to take a look at this. This is a HTML file that if you open it up, it essentially shows you the API manual, and this is all the internal functions that you can access, and it's pretty complete. It doesn't have a lot of description, but it's complete as far as the functions. And then there is the screen editor manual that is useful for learning how to screen edit. Now, this isn't a step-by-step thing by any means. There's a very nice editing video that they've put on their on YouTube on their area of Newfangled Solutions. I put a link for that down below as well. I would recommend watching that video as well and reading this. This is useful, but it's not as, it could be much better, let me say that. It's okay, but not great. Then there's a scripting manual, which is has a little more information on the Lua scripting. Now, Lua is a computer language. It's kind of a basic language, but it's pretty capable. That's what you program functions with in external macros like Avid does with their touch plate, as well as the internal screen macros that you, or functions that you want to store in the screen set. So we'll look at that a little bit, but this is, you know, the manual they have for that. So these are a couple of documents you'd want to reference at different points. And finally, this directory is a very useful reference. It's the Mach4, under Mach4, the Modules directory. This has some nice examples of Lua code. For example, this is a touch-off routine. It's not the Avid one, so the Avid modules are under Avid CNC here, and they tend to not give you, they only give you the compiled version, which is the LuaX, so you can't view that. But the one that's .lua is the actual source code, and you can view that. And one I really like is the touch off, and there's another one called probing here that's interesting. But if you open these, it's a pretty large software module, and it has a lot of examples of usage for things like writing DROs, getting the DRO value, modifying tool offsets and things like that. So if you kind of go through this, you'll find examples of how to use the specific APIs that I showed you that API manual has. I said they're not very descriptive, but you can see how they're used in here in the formatting of the actual variables and stuff, and that can be helpful in figuring out why something's not working or how it should properly be used. So this is a great reference directory of different code examples to use for actually writing functions if you're going to get more advanced. Okay, now let's talk about some of the customizations I did and why, and that'll get you thinking maybe about what kind of things you might want to do. So as you would see in your stock Avid menu screen, all these buttons would be the same color. In the jogging, all these buttons would be the same color. So I'm kind of more visual oriented. I want to highlight some of these buttons as like red is kind of like look out, don't do this unless you really mean to do it. For example, stop and close G code. Like I want to be careful not to hit those unless I really want to. And then starting the operation, either cycle start or loading a G code, those kind of things that I always have to do at the beginning. And the close and the stop are not necessarily things I have to ever do when I'm running. That's kind of the way I look at it. And then in some cases, like in jogging, I want to associate the two Z-axis movements and the A-axis and the different axes together. So I've color-coded the Z's one color and the Y's one color. And that way I don't accidentally hit the wrong button when I'm trying to jog back and forth, because I know, these two, this is up and down for A, and I'm not, the X and Y, for example, on my laptop screen are very hard to distinguish from each other on the screen. Just going from the text itself, the color really helps. Next to that, you'll see I've added some buttons. So in the beginning of the video, when I show in the keyboard shortcuts moving the gantry, these are the buttons that also move the gantry. So you can have keyboard shortcuts and the buttons to do it. In here, I've added a laser setup menu. So this whole menu I created to do this left half here allows me to do X, Y, and Z offsets, and that's specifically for using the electronic touch plate with an offset conducting rod. So I showed that rod that I had beside my laser, so I can use the Avid Auto Z touch plate functionality
with that rod, but that has a offset from the actual beam because, you know, their feature here is made to work with the actual tool itself, which is conductive. But in the case of the laser or maybe a plasma head or other kinds of heads, they don't have, you know, a direct electrically conductive means that's already lined up with the cutting edge of the tool. So, and some of you might have, I've seen some people have laser crosshairs mounted to their gantry somewhere. This can be used to offset from that as well. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's just the basic offset. This one here lets me set my beam parameter such that with a little bit of characterization, and that's these 4 numbers here, by understanding the parameters of this focal cone of my laser, I can enter those in and kind of keep them as constants. And then down here in the beam diameter, I can just say, well, I want a laser beam that's 50 thousandths of an inch wide, and to burn. And what that lets me do is instead of having to fill in and crosshatch, which is a very slow process. It looks great, but it's very slow because you're stepping over making very fine crosshatch fills. I can just simply raise the laser up, and if I have enough power with the laser to make that wide of a beam, or the beam quality is good, I can do that in one pass. So in my particular one, I can go up to, I think, 60 to 70 thousandths and make a nice solid beam on that. I'm going to do a separate video on more details on how to use these, but that's kind of the idea here. So you plug the numbers in and then hit XYZ or set Z. In this case, I'm not homed. This is actually running offline, and there's safety checks in these routines such that if the machine isn't homed, it's not going to actually set any of these numbers. So anyway, that's why I got that error. And then if we move over to the right, you can see I've highlighted the Auto Z touch plate color. I've changed my air solenoid. This used to be relay 1 here. I changed it to air because in my case, my relay 1 is actually my air solenoid control, so I made it a more appropriate name. And then if we go over to the right, I've taken this area that used to look just like this and be just a spindle area, and this is really my cutting head control area. So I might be using a spindle, or I might be using a laser, or you might have a plasma head, or you know what else, drag knife. You could have all kinds of things on here that you want specific controls for, and you're only going to use one of those at a time. So in my opinion, they should be tabbed as separate things like this. At least for me, that's how I want to do it. So I took all of those ESS or the Warp 9 created laser functions from Warp 9's laser set. These were the pieces that I wanted, so I exported those and brought them into this one, and then I made this area tabbed, and that's all pretty easy to do in here. So that's a quick tour of my screen and kind of my thoughts behind why I did it. Obviously, you can do whatever you want, and hopefully when we're all done here, you've got some ideas and you have the information to go play with this some yourself. Okay, let's do some screen editing. First thing, as we talked about before, we're going to make a backup of the screen. So we're going to go into Mach4, down into screens, and this is the one I'm editing. So Control C, Control V makes a copy. Okay, now I made a backup. So now I'm going to leave this one. This is the one I have loaded, and I'm just going to leave it loaded. Now I'm going to mess it all up, and when I'm all done, I'm just going to simply delete it and then rename this backup I made back to the correct name, which is here. Okay, so to start editing, first we need to disable the machine. Again, you won't get the edit menus activated until the machine's disabled, or Mach4 is disabled. So we go under operator and pull up the edit screen, or click on the edit screen, and it converts everything to the edit screen mode. Now you'll see your whole Mach4 screen here, but you also get this new set of areas on the left here. And this is how we'll do our editing. There's a pull down menu of kind of a hierarchy here, similar to a file manager. Now there's new menus up at the top that are specific just to editing screens. Under the screen menu, you see save screen as. So this is where you can save the screen directly as something else. And then manage images. This gives you the ability to import images. So like I showed before, where I had my own logo, or in this case, this laser setup diagram here, this is just a PNG file. So you can create any kind of graphics image in PNG form and add it to the library that is available using this tool, and then you can insert it somewhere. I'm not going to do that, but that's how that's done, and that's what that's for. So you're adding images, managing them there. Formatting, so there's a bunch of features here for aligning and resizing buttons and different areas of it. I'm not going to cover that too much because that's covered pretty nicely in the ArtSoft screen editing video that I'll reference in the comment section below. So they walk through that pretty nicely on how to align several buttons to each other and things like that. So it's more of a formatting features. This is kind of the same as other Mach4 stuff and the wizard. And then operator here, this is where you can exit edit screen. And when you click on this, if you've made changes, it's going to ask you whether you want to save them or not. So if you don't want to change the screen's name, which you would use the save as up here, under the screen, you'd use the save screen as if you wanted to save it as a different name. If you just simply want to save the changes you'd made, you just click edit screen here, and that would take you out of it and save it to the same one. So this is really just a save function as you're leaving. Okay, now let's look at what these items are on the left. So if you look at these and expand them, you see there's a group. So this could be an area, and then each button or each feature under it. So you can see when I click on control group, it highlights this block here. So that is the set of features that these things represent and where we can edit it. You can also do it the opposite ways. Like if you don't know where it's called or where to find it, you can just click on this button and it will drill down into the group that it's in and then down to the very specific feature. So in this case, it highlighted button laser set offsets. And that's the name of this button. So that's kind of how you can either get at it from the name up top here. I can click on this, and that's this box. Doesn't really have any function. It's just a box with a line. Head tabs. That's my cutting head tab section. So if I expand this, it's going to have the ESS laser and spindle would be sub tabs under that. And then if I expand those, this is all the list of features that's under that. So if I go into the laser one, for example, and pick group laser main, that's this set here. So that's how you can find them, either going from the buttons back to the tree elements or from the tree elements down to the buttons. Now the one below here, this is a specific information that you edit to change the characteristics of the feature or add the code or the function references to it. So up here is kind of the hierarchy of where things are laid out and how they're tied together. And then down here is the functionality. So you don't do too much up top here other than select things like this. And the other nice thing is when you right click on this, you see you get cut, copy, import, and export. So what's really cool about this editor here is that you can take a whole block, for example, this head tabs. If I want to take this whole piece of code out of this laser screen and pull it into another one, which is exactly what I did to get these functions out of Warp 9's laser set and into mine, I just would simply highlight this. Here's the ESS laser, and I would right click and say export, and I can export it, say, to my desktop, and that set will be saved to my desktop. Now if I open my desktop, it's right here. Now I can do just the opposite. I can go into Mach4 and say I want to put that under main tabs. Right click there and I say import, and I can pull that back in. Now I don't want to do that because I'm not really looking to have another set somewhere else there, but that's how you can export a chunk of features, or even just one button. It lets you kind of take it any size chunk you want. But the cool thing is it takes the graphical characteristics along with all the functionality that's written behind that, any code that you've written. So it's a complete package of that feature, and that makes it really easy to kind of swap back and forth different features. So that's kind of all you do from this top section here. Select the different things, and then down here is where you're going to edit those features. So let's just pick a button, say this one here. I've just selected that. It highlighted this up here, but it also brought up all the features. So you can see here's the color of that button. Now if I don't like that color, I can go in and select that color and select a different color up here. Say okay. Boom, I got the color that it is down here, and you see the button actually change color. So if I exit it now, that would save that color update, and now that button color. One thing to be careful of when you're selecting these items is that they're drag and droppable too. So you can move these around. So when you're selecting them to highlight them, be really careful that you're not moving the mouse, because it's really easy to select and bump them slightly. And there's no undo in this editor. I'm going to keep mentioning that because it's really irritating. Mach4 does not have an undo button on here. So if that changes, I either have to move it back, or I can change these height, width, and where the top and stuff. So if I move this over, you can see these numbers, the top and the left position changing, and that's relative to this little window. So the cool thing is you don't have to change all of the button coordinates if you're going to move this whole box somewhere, because they're all relative to the 0, 0 of the upper left corner of this box. So they're kind of self-contained. So you can move the whole box if you wanted somewhere like this, and the buttons will stay relative to that. Now I've just kind of screwed all of these up, so I'm not going to save this in the end, but this is how you can manually change those. And then, like I said, what I usually do is just bump them a little bit until things are aligned. So I can say 480 and enter, and then that whole box moves back up. So there's the 3 ways you can edit their positions and sizes and stuff. Is you can drag and drop them, you can manually change the numbers down here, and then, as I mentioned, there's these formatting tools up top here that let you pick multiples and align them all together. You can make them the same size. So these are kind of like really useful for if you've got a whole column of buttons, or like these DROs here, and I want to make them all the same size and the same position and everything relative to each other. These formatting tools are really useful for that. Okay, so that's kind of the formatting, and just to kind of go over some of the other things is like you can hide them, you can choose to disable them and stuff. So maybe Maybe you want them to be here, but not always be visible on some screens. So this is an easy way to turn them off and stuff. I haven't found a good manual anywhere that actually describes all of these parameters, which is kind of irritating. And the more complicated they get, some of these have a pretty good set of items on here. So this is, you just kind of have to look through them and sometimes play with them and see what formats and fonts and things you like. The other thing I'll point out is that it has a funny interaction here between the height and width of the box and the font sizes. So sometimes it can be kind of annoying to try and get, say, like this incremental jog button. You can see how I've kind of crammed the wording into this box size. If you change the font a little bit bigger, it might automatically change the size of the box. And sometimes if you change the size of the box, it'll automatically change the font to fit. But they don't always actually fit correctly. So when you find something is changing the font size up here, go down here and mess with the font size to get what you want. And then you might have to mess with the height of the box to actually let it fit. So like I said, if something seems to change when you changed one thing, go down and look and see if it's kind of like whack-a-mole. These two kind of relate to each other. Okay, that's the properties of the button itself. Now if we go to the next button over here, these are where the functionality comes in. So in this case, there's only one function here. It's cycle jog. So I've got the incremental jog step, and what this is doing is every time you push it, it's cycling the jog increment. In other words, it's causing you to go through that list. In Mach4, you can define what all your jog increments are. In my case, I've got 1 inch, 0.1 inch, 0.01 inch, 0.001 inch. But you can, I think there's 8 or 10 different parameters, but this just cycles through that list. And if I click the pull down, you've got all these choices in here. So in this particular case, this was doing cycle jog increment. So every time I push it, it's going to walk through the list. Yeah, there's 10 of them here. But I could also just say, I want jog increment 3. And so if I push that button, it's going to actually pick the third position in that table. So this is what I call just the built-in functions. These are all functions that are built into Mach4, and they're all enumerated here. You can just select which function you want, and that's where a lot of these are. The jogging, all of these jog buttons. If I go select on one of these, it's jog. It's the jog Y button, and again, a bunch of different jog functions. I can change them, right? Okay, one of the things I wanted to show was where the default values are stored for some of the DROs. So if I go to this laser setup routine, I've got a bunch of DROs here, and so I'll just pick the Z offset one, for example, and you'll see that right here, this value 0.585, that's the default value. So it's stored in the screen set, and I can change this to any value while I'm using it, and then when I close Mach4 and reopen, it's going to reinitialize that DRO to 0.585. And so this is useful, especially for these 3 values here and these 4 values here, because those are kind of constants for my laser setup. So I don't really want to change them. I don't want to accidentally mess them up and then not have them be populated correctly again in the next session of Mach4. So that's a good reason to use the defaults. Now there's another way to treat these, is you could write a function to write back these values when the screen is unloaded. So in other words, when Mach4 is shutting down, you can write these values back to the machine.ini, and then when Mach4 starts up, you can write a function that loads them from the machine.ini, and some variables are treated that way in Mach4 or by different screens. The benefit of that is that whatever your last value was, say for example, like jog rate and rapid rate and some of these, they will get changed sometimes depending on, again, what the user wants for their screen. But sometimes it makes sense to save these values back when you close Mach4, so that when you resume your next session, like tomorrow or whatever, then the current values are still there, and it resumes. But sometimes you don't want to do that, so in that case you use the default values, which are located right down here in the properties for that specific DRO. Okay, I want to pick one. Like for example, the DRO here. This is just running on update. So basically, it's if I change a value in here by typing in and hitting enter, it just updates back into the DRO that's called DRO offset. So this is just like it's basically a variable storage location. My code references it, but it's making use of the basic DRO feature built into Mach4. So there's no direct code that I wrote for this. It's actually the button down here that's going to make use of these variables when they're updated. So if we click on that, you can see we've got this again is the name of the button, positions, colors, all that. And then if I go to the events, here's what's going to happen when I push that button. And you can also distinguish between left, down, and up or down. So some buttons only are active when you hold them down, and then when you release them, it deactivates the function. So you've got all kinds of left, down scripts and actions and different things here. In my case, when I let go of that button, I'm calling this function, and when I click on the code for that, you see all it does is make a call to a set offsets for laser function. So this is a function I wrote that's embedded in the main script. Now there's kind of two places. Is every one of these buttons can have code within them, like this one does. This one's just simply calling another function though, but I could have this function's code actually in here. I don't like to put them in here because I like them all up in the main script, just because I can view all of them and edit them all within the same file. So I'll show you next where those are actually at. But this could actually have this function in here, and then it would be accessible to edit in here. Now if I made some changes in here, just make some changes, when I exit this, it's going to ask me, do I want to save it? And I don't want to, because that's kind of a nonsensical change, but I'm just going to hit no and it won't save it. But if I were to make changes there, I would save it, and then it would save it into the screen set. Now let's go look at where this code actually is. So as I said, these are where you select the individual codes, but there's a master screen set code area, which is, if you click on the default way up here, sorry, one higher, the actual very top level, then it highlights this. There's isn't so much useful here. I mean, this is basically your whole complete window of Mach4. You can see the border is highlighted, so you don't really need to mess with that unless I suppose if your screen size is, you want a different aspect ratio, you want to work on a really wide screen or something like that. But I don't mess with that. So I want to go to the code though. So I'm going to go to this one and select the code. Now this is the main code area for the whole screen, so it's got a lot of different stuff in here, and I'll go down to those laser functions. Trying to remember how far down it was. Here's some set Z, different laser stuff. Set Z for laser. So this is the button, the set XYZ calls set Z for laser, and this is the function. And what it's doing is taking these offsets and adding them to the work offsets that were already adjusted by the Avid. Move this over so you can see the button. So when you run the auto Z routine from Avid, it sets your X, Y, and Z offsets for your work coordinates. What this function does here is takes these extra offsets that I've added and it combines them with these and resets your work offsets. So now it takes into account that difference between where the electronic touch rod is to the laser beam, and that's what this function does. And so, you know, I'm not a code expert, so I'm not going to go. I'm more of a hack, so I'm not going to do a good job of explaining this. And you know, if you're in here editing, it's better for you to read the API manual and everything. But you know, I've got some just at a really high level description. Here's where it's checking to see if the machine is homed, and if it's not homed, it's basically going to jump out of the routine and just throw up an error and say, hey, the machine's not homed, so this isn't a safe function to run. The next block here is going and getting the DRO values for Z. So that's here. And so, you know, you get the DRO values, make a calculation. That's actually not the function. It's a longer, yeah, my bad. This is the actual function for this button because it has to get the X, Y, and Z offsets. It's going to check to make sure it gets them from the DRO, so it imports the values that the user put in here. Then it's going to do a quick check against some basic values like, you know, I don't want a number that's negative for some of them or positive for some ones, and I don't want too big of a number because it'll run into the edge of the machine limits. There's some range that makes sense for these. So in this case, you see I've allowed the X, Y, and Z offsets to be within a plus or minus 5-inch range, and so it'll flag that if it's wrong, and then it comes out and says, oh, and things like these are printing into this history log down here. So it's a way for you, it's more for code debug, but if you want to go back and see what happened, you can pop this history button up in Mach4 and it kind of, you can read all the, as it went through everything, what its calculations were. So I like to write those in there. That's just kind of to check things up. Then in this case, we're going to set a new X work coordinate. So it's taking the values that it combined. In this case, I'm going to go get the current X-axis work coordinate that's in Mach4, and then it's going to add the offset that was just pulled out of these DROs, add it together, check it, and then write it back in. So it's a relatively straightforward function. It's just a matter of really looking up these APIs in the API manual and understanding what they do and getting their formats right. And that's where I say it's really helpful to use the API manual, but also look at some example code that's known to be working. So that's where some of those touch and probe functions that are pretty elaborate, so they have a lot of examples in them, really come in handy. So all of the functions that I've written for these laser functions are in here. The functions for moving to the front of the machine are right here. So right here is if I that button, that hotkey that I push to move to the front of the machine or move to middle or move to back, those are these functions right here. These are very simple functions. Again, it's going to check to see if the machine is homed and bail out if it's not. But then if it's okay, it is homed, then it's going to call a function called remember position. The reason I do that is there's one of the 4 buttons that I have is to go back to last position. So it records the current position before it changes it, so that if you want to go back to where you just were, it can go back to this. It knows it from this remember position call because it stored the current position. So and then it's just simply going to throw out a warning, say, hey, I'm about to move the gantry, so get out of the way, which is probably not useful because it's going to print up here pretty fast and then immediately move it. And then it's going to use the G53, which is a machine coordinate move, to a specific spot on the machine in machine coordinates. In this case, you don't use, for a function like this where you want to move to a specific place on your table, you would use machine coordinates, not coordinates based on work coordinates. So that's kind of an overview of where the code is, kind of what it looks like. There's these move to front, middle, and back are not my functions. I've modified them a little bit, but they are very well explained step by step in a video I'll reference below. This is kind of, I really like this guy because he got me into editing these things, and so he takes you step by step in how to insert the code, edit it, and make all this happen. So that's kind of those button functions in a nutshell. Okay, now let's look at having functions that are accessible from the keyboard. So again, for me, that was to turn the laser on or off, to move the gantry around, and a couple other things. So those require functions to be in this area, just like these buttons that are on the Mach4 screen, but there's a couple of other additional things to make them so that the keyboard shortcuts will also activate those. So I want to get out of this to go show some of the other steps first. So I don't want to save any changes I've made in here. It looks like I didn't make any changes because it didn't ask me to update it. So I'm exited out of that. I'm going to exit out of edit screen mode, and I'm going to tell it not to save the current screen because I don't want it to save all those button changes and stuff. So there's two things we have to edit in Mach4 first to do this. One is we have to go into the plugins, and there is a keyboard input plugin, and this is from Newfangled Solutions, so this is part of what comes with Mach4. And I'm going to open this up, and when you select that, you basically get all of your keyboard shortcuts here. And starting from send back down, these are all ones I've added, but the rest of these are all ones that are in the Avid CNC standard build. So, you know, where I showed you there's a lot of people don't know these, but all these hotkeys for rapid jog and of incremental jog and regular jog, they're already here. And so the way you read these is, this is the input name on the column. So that's not useful for understanding which key on the keyboard you need to hit. It's the name of the keyboard function, so that you're going to use that name to tie it down the line to a function. But the key column is the key that you're going to push on your keyboard, and then you've got up to 3 modifiers here, where you can hit Shift or Alt and or Control. So for example, the X plus is going to call the function X jog in the plus direction, and you use the right arrow key for that, and you do not hold down Shift, Alt, or Control. Those are not selected. But if we go to X plus R, which is a rapid jog, you would also hold down the right key, but you'd also hold the Shift key. So this is how you read these, and you can see then the incremental jogs are all using the Control button as a modifier on those. So that's how all of these work. You got a key, and if you want to change the key, like I'm just going to push the down arrow. I just pushed the down arrow on my keyboard, and it selected down arrow. So you just select the key, and then Shift, Alternate, and Control, you just get those by clicking with the left mouse button. But this one you actually select via pushing the key on the keyboard. And then the function name here is built in, and then when it gets to the ones that I created, I don't have a built-in function name because I'm not calling anything from Mach4. I'm making my own functions, so I'm going to rely on the names on this left column that I gave it. But again, so I got to send a back, so it's a back with a control. I like the control. I like using the control or some sort of modifier because that way you can't accidentally hit the keyboard and have something shoot the gantry all the way across, right? I have to be pretty intentional by hitting 2 keys. In the case of the laser on, I wanted to be really intentional. So for laser on, I need the L key plus the alternate key plus the control key to turn it off, and then for laser off it's just L and control to turn it off. So that's very intentional because it can be turning the laser on can be kind of dangerous, even though I have the power set to a very low level for that, but still I wanted to be sure. So anyway, the first thing to do when creating your own keys is to go into here into the config keys in the plugin to make these modifications. All right, and then if you're gonna save those, you'd hit OK and exit. I'm gonna cancel out. The second thing you're gonna do is go into Control in Mach4 and go into Input Signals, and we're gonna set our inputs to align to the keyboard functions. And this is these are like generic inputs into Mach4. So we'll see the input numbers are referenced in the code that we're going to go look at, and then this is mapping. This device is the actual plugin type that you're mapping to. So if I click on that left click once and then pull this down, you can see I could map into ESS or the height control for the torch, different areas, keyboard, and this is the input name that we had from the keyboard plugin, and then this is just a user description, like what do you want to, what's a longer description so you know what it means. So in this case, I'm sending the gantry to the way back, bringing it to the front, turning the laser on, things like that, or arm and fire with the laser. So these are just descriptions. So you add all of these and make sure you enable the mapping here. Otherwise, that's not really going to turn them on if they're not enabled. So those are the 2 things you need to do in Mach4 to kind of set the keyboard path up from the keyboard through that keyboard plugin, and then here from the keyboard plugin into Mach4. And again, if I was going to save those changes, I would have hit OK instead of cancel. Now we'll go back to the screen editor and see where those plug in. And again, the code or the video I referenced for the movement functions on YouTube, he did a really good job of kind of walking through all of those, and that's why I'm not really repeating the step-by-step stuff. I'm just trying to stay at a little higher level, but he did a very good job of explaining all these steps in good detail. So we're going to go back up to the main code area, selecting the whole screen. Then I'm going to go down here and select the code, and I'm going to go scroll down into the input section. This is under the signal library, and there's a section for inputs right here. So on that second screen in Mach4 that we edited with the inputs, the generic 1 through 20 or whatever it was, this is the code. This is where it enters from there into a specific function. So you can just keep adding these. I've only used 6, so there's 1 through 6 and 10. The 6 here are ones I added, 1 through 6, and 10 was already here from Mach4, from Avid. But so my input 1 is being used to move to back, and all this is doing is it's saying if it sees that input toggle, which means you push the key on the keyboard, or it could be the multiple keys, the key plus the qualifying keys. If that state is 1, then call move to front. And so that's simply, this is the tie from the external of going from the keyboard into the code area of this screen. So it's basically going from the plugin in the first, the plugin we edited, then it's going to Mach4 through the mapping of those input functions, and then into the screen, into this code via those input function numbers. So input 1 is just simply, if it sees that toggle, it's going to call the function move to back. So I'm going to do a search, or find, in this case, move to, whoops, now if I could type, move to back. Okay, so that's the call, and then I'm going to hit it one more time, and here's the function. So we already kind of went over this, but this is going to check if it's homed and then move the gantry to 26 inches X and Y 42 inches in machine coordinates. So that's kind of the path and the things you have to edit. So you have to edit, again, the plugin, the plugin for the keyboard. You have to enter the input list to match the keyboard for one of the inputs, and then you have to edit in this file the input function up above, kind of add it because it won't be there if nobody's using it, and then call some other function to make it useful. So those are kind of the 4 steps to make this happen. And then obviously the key one is you have to write this code to do something useful. So again, like I have a function that arms and fires the laser. The one we said was L plus Control plus Alt. That one is right here, laser on. So this is turning my coolant on, because anytime I turn my laser on, I want my air assist nozzle to be blowing air, and then this is the code to set the internal registers to arm the laser and turn it on. So that's what all of these API calls are for, essentially. And then at the very end, it's printing out in the history line that the laser is test firing. So it's just kind of a warning that that's happening. And then when I push L and Control, I'm going through that whole keyboard path down in through, I think, signal input signal 5 or something like that, and calling the laser off function. And then this just does the opposite. It's going to reset those registers to turn off, disarm, turn off, and then disarm, and then finally turn the coolant off, and then say, okay, the laser test is disabled. So that's how those work. Okay, 2 final things I want to mention are, one is that the screen formatting to get different features looking pretty and everything is sometimes a little tricky. If you look at this command word here, it's slid up and covered up. Let me get this file menu out of the way. It's covered up here with the line. So you would say, oh, that should be resized a little bit. But if I change the size of this, it could change it. It changed it a little bit. But then if I look at it on my laptop that has a slightly different resolution or different aspect ratio, it might look okay. So when you're building these menus, especially if you're trying to build them to work on a lot of different computers, you have to kind of try them out and kind of massage the window sizes and stuff until they look good across multiple monitors. And another one I can see here is that this output window isn't quite wide enough to get this last digit in here. And yet on my laptop, I know it looks fine. So, you know, it's good to get it looking good on one computer, then go try it out on some different screens. If you're really trying to make it robust for, like, if you're trying to make a screen for other people as well, or like in my case, I have a very high resolution large screen in my design office, and then on my where I run Mach4 offline and do a lot of my screen editing, and then on my actual laptop that I run Mach4 on, it can look substantially different, so I have to go try it there as well. The second thing I want to point out is I just talked about the code being in different locations on some of those functions, right, where that code could be local, kind of buried within the button code area by itself, or it could be up in the main code area where I try to put most of mine. But one of the neat things, and the whole screen is not, it's not ASCII code, it's actually binary, so you can't read it. But one of the nice things that Mach4 does is every time it runs, it takes that whole screen and converts it to a text file. All the functions, so you can see all the functions that are in the main code and all the little functions that are buried under the buttons and stuff. They're all dumped into a file, and that's in the Mach4 directory and called the screenscript.lua. Now this does give you code that I use it as a reference, and you can actually copy the functions. It's the actual code, but it's not an executable file. It just gets dumped out every time you load a screen, so you have the full contents of the screen. So when I open this up, I see all of the functions in the main code, but I'll see if I can find some down in here. These are all my functions, but if I go to the bottom, I'm gonna get, yeah, there's some other functions that are called from other areas that are kind of part of the screen, buried in other areas that you actually have to hunt for, but you'll see them down towards the bottom here. So pretty much any, well, not pretty much, but any function that's in the screen somewhere will show up in this file if you load that screen. So this is a nice place to kind of button it all up. If you're trying to find a function and you can't find which button it's hidden under or whatever, this is a great way to go look at all the code for that whole screen. And it also has all the load functions and everything, so it's kind of a nice place to look. So that's the whole video. I know I kind of covered it fast and at a high level, but it was really intended to give you some ideas and get you thinking about making edits for your own. It's actually very easy to do. It's low risk. You know, if you make a backup before you start, you really can't screw it up. And please, if you're going to start doing this, there's some good references. I'm going to, again, down in the description section, I'll have a couple of good videos where I got my start on it. Look at the documentation directory in Mach4 and read through those manuals. Like I said, they're not the greatest. At least the manuals aren't the greatest. The API manual is good. It's got all the APIs in it. It's just not as descriptive as I would like to see. But those are great references as well, so that can get you going. And if you have any questions, if I didn't cover something well or left questions, please ask questions down in the comment section. I always read them and respond. And also, if there's other videos or I missed a section that you like more description on, if there's interest, and I'm willing to do follow-up videos as well. So thanks a lot. If this kind of stuff is helpful, please subscribe. It helps me out. I just mostly do this to help people, but eventually it'd be nice to get monetized.